Nobody talks about this, and this is such a critical element of their ability to succeed. What I learned and what I came to truly believe is that being professional is about being calm and cool, composed, confident, at all times. These two things lead to more misunderstandings between people because you do not have like the in-person contact as much, which helps us read all the emotional nuance that's there. One challenge, difficult for one person, there may be other things kind of like standing in the way of solving for an issue for another person. There are events, right, that come out of nowhere. They're unpredictable. They feel as though they endanger you in some way.
Hi, I'm Greg Voisen. I'm the host of Inside Personal Growth, and I want to welcome Thais Gibson. She owns the Personal Development School, and she is sponsoring our podcast, and we are so pleased that she is. Now, she offers a program at the Personal Development School that I want to let you know a little bit about. She says the best relationship and lives don't just happen. You can make them happen. If you tried it at all and feel stuck, it might be due to your attachment style. This is the hidden force shaping your beliefs and behaviors. Thais Gibson at the Personal Development School has uncovered a method to transform your attachment style, helping you become your best self. With an all-access pass, you'll get on-demand courses, live webinars, and study groups for deep personal growth. And for my listeners, we're offering an exclusive 50% discount on the quarterly membership. That's just $149 every 3 months. Find the link in the show notes, and the discount will apply at checkout. Start transforming your relationships today. Thanks for listening to Inside Personal Growth. And please go to the Personal Development School, Thais Gibson, to learn more about your personal attachment style. Welcome back to another episode of Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voisen, the host of Inside Personal Growth. And joining me from the San Francisco Bay Area is author Dina Smith. Dina, good day to you. How are you doing?
Good day. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, and it's a pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
Luis Velazquez was the gentleman that introduced us. He was on the show. And for all of you who don't know who he is, I guess you guys are kind of colleagues and know each other from the coaching arena. And he did a great podcast with us on his book about resilience. So we'll make a reference to that as well. And I always appreciate the referrals. So, Dina, I'm going to let the listeners have an idea of who you are before we dive into the book itself. We are going to be talking about her book called Emotionally Charged. The subtitle of that book is How to Lead in the New World of Work. Actually, she doesn't have a copy sitting in front of her, nor do I, because it's a new book. It's going to be released here in February, correct? So, yeah, so she's excited. I'm excited for her because I know what it's like to get a new book. So Dina is an executive coach to senior leaders and teams at world-leading brands such as Adobe, Netflix, Gap, Dropbox, Stripe, and numerous high-growth companies. A former business executive herself, she's the founder and CEO of, say it for me again, I don't want to mispronounce it, Cognitas Coaching, and helps leaders with their teams reach new heights of success. She's written over 60 articles for Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, and Forbes on leadership and career success, and is frequently featured in international media outlets such as Wall Street Journal, Business Insider, Newsweek, and the BBC. She's an author of this brand new book, which is Oxford University Press, 2025, as we said, How to Lead It's called Emotionally Charged: How to Lead in the New World of Work. Well, we're everybody who listens to this podcast, from all of my LinkedIn listeners to anybody that's out there, the thousands that do listen to this. The new world of work has been upon us for a while, and uh, and it wasn't just COVID. I think a lot of people say, "Oh well, COVID is what changed it." Yeah, it changed the dynamics, I think, a little bit, Dina, and the way in which we work remotely. And now we're seeing more people come back together again. So, really, what motivated you to write Emotionally Charged? And was there any personal experience or any pivotal moment that inspired this book's creation? I know you want to disseminate this knowledge to the listeners and to the readers, but was there anything in particular for you?
There were actually sort of multiple factors that came together, sort of somewhat simultaneously that motivated the creation of this book. And first, I would be so fully remiss if I didn't mention that I had
You have a co-author, Alicia,
co-author.
and that was my fault. I should have said her name, and I
No,
cut
no,
you.
it's okay. It's okay because she's sort of integral to the story, so I will give her all of the kudos she deserves. But, my co-author is, a person named Dr. Alicia Grandy. She heads up the organizational psych department at Penn State, and she and I together wrote an article for HBR called "The Emotional Labor of Leadership." And it went absolutely viral, it becoming more and more aware to me that the whole emotional life of a leader was something that was really under-recognized, under-acknowledged, all of the demands that exist there in the emotional realm, and that was really validated by the extreme reception that this article had. Um,
Why do you think why excuse me for asking, but why do you believe at this point in history, when we look at this 2024 or 23, whenever you wrote it, that this really charged audiences to want to read that and understand more about what was going on with the emotions of leaders?
Well, first off, largely the audience was leaders. And I believe they finally felt seen, like what it's like to actually walk in the shoes of a
Mhm.
leader, like the demands and expectations that exist for them that really are squarely sort of in this space of managing their own emotions as well as managing the emotions in the workplace. Like they are chief architects of sort of the emotional culture of their team. And all of this, it doesn't exist on their job description. Like nobody talks about this. And this is such a critical element of their ability to succeed. And we're not talking about just emotional intelligence, but if you think about what leaders are expected to do, right? Like rally that team to sort of like burn the midnight oil so they can get that project done. They're expected to sort of help a team member who is struggling with task related and now even personal challenges, right? If there's conflict on the team that can't get resolved, they're sort of expected to step in and soothe tempers and navigate that conflict. They're expected to inspire. They're expected to reduce uncertainty and reduce stress levels so people can be productive. And they're expected to manage their own emotions while they're doing all of this. So there's just like such an abundant amount of emotion work that leaders are expected to do. And as you alluded early on, like the pandemic changed things. But what I like to think about is it really accelerated trends that were already occurring in the workplace.
Yeah.
Um, and so what we have though now today are far higher demands and far higher expectations on leaders, many of which are like kind of pulling on their emotional resources.
You know, it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast that we just broke yesterday with Vern Harnish. Got a company called Scaling Up, and it's a big operation for helping companies scale. And he was making a comment, Dina, about the culture of a company and how to keep people emotionally, I would say, high, engaged. Like, hey, some of these companies, like every Friday, there's a dinner, right? We get together, personally. We go have a barbecue. We go do these kind of things, which we've known for a long time.
Mhm.
But I think that the he used an example of like SpaceX. So when the rocket went up and came down and landed, how emotionally charged the people were to actually have a huge win like that, right? And I think part of this is about how are people getting these wins, and then how frequently, and then how is that keeping them engaged in the work they're doing. So what do you think from your own emotional journey, because look, you've been there, you were working your own company and so on, has influenced the themes and the tools discussed in the book?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my gosh, if I kinda go back to my own emotional journey, and I don't think it's too unique. And by that, what I mean to say is, um, there were a variety of different kind of factors that led me, to believe that sort of, emotions really didn't have, like, much of a place for me, like, earlier in my career. So, I kinda grew up in a traditional family. um, productivity and performance were, like, the way that you got noticed.
Expected.
That's the way you get noticed, and so kind of started to equate that with worth. By nature, I'm just sort of a driven and high achieving person. And then, as a leader myself, I was a management consultant, and then kind of rose through the ranks of leadership in a few companies. And what I learned and what I came to truly believe is that being professional is about being calm and cool, composed, confident, um, at all times, and I really honed that ability and gained like a big source of pride out of being able to, regardless of what was going on in my personal life, to kind of like rise above it, like push all those pesky emotions out of the way and like get the job done and get
Mhm.
it job like, get it done, in a way that was sort of unruffled and cool on the surface. Um, and so you kinda take all of that together, right? And I think there's a lot of leaders with sort of similar backstory and similar experience and similar learning through their career journeys. And, but as an adult, I started to do really, like, more work on myself, and I came to realize how much I was missing, how much, like, critical information I was missing by ignoring my own emotions and the emotions in my midst. And, so I really embarked on a journey of learning to sort of understand my emotions, understand the emotions of others, how to use them, to sort of like influence situations for good. And now, I mean, right, look at me. I'm sort of like this flag bearer for acknowledging and respecting and bringing more emotions into the workplace. And so it has been a journey, and much of what I've learned along the way, both through my own work as well as, a really critical element of this book, is that every tool and strategy we share is backed by science. They are proven, and all of this has come together in this book, and we share it out so that leaders can really kind of take better care of themselves, in terms of leading effectively while managing their well-being and helping those around them.
Yeah. We you bring up so much, and I like how you articulated that. And yet in that um cacophony of things we're talking about, because leaders today are, I think, dealt with so much more to deal with
Mhm.
than previously, meaning the quantity of things that they've got to work with, the expectations, the everything that's there. So it's a two-pronged question I have for you. First, what is emotionally charged mean to you?
Mhm.
It's kind of the critical concept. Um, and how do you recommend people approach emotions like anger, fear, uncertainty, especially when they feel overwhelmed? And I want to say the word overwhelmed and underline it because in today's work world, we're talking about the world of work, there has been, uh, and I don't know if you just redefined work and said, well, we're not going to call it work anymore. I mean, there's people out there now talking about d- different ways to name what it is that we do today. But I think for most people, it still is work because that's where they go to hopefully fulfill their purpose. Hopefully, I think that's a charged question. Um, come away with some level of meaning in whatever it is that they're doing. So emotionally charged, what's it mean? And then what are you going to help people who go off the rails here, being overwhelmed or uncertain?
Well, we're gonna help them not go off the rails. Let's start there.
Okay.
But so, emotionally charged really has, 2 meanings, and it's why we were so sort of excited about it for our title is, um, the workplace of today is more emotionally charged. Emotions have always been part of the workplace, but now, there I think the volume has gone up on the emotions that are there, um, for a couple different reasons. And it goes back to the way in which work has changed. So, for example, even though, yes, JP Morgan just called everybody back to the office 5 days a week, and we are seeing more return to the office, there is still a lot more work that is being done remotely and on very distributed teams. These two things lead to more misunderstandings between people because you do not have like the in-person contact as much, which helps us read all the emotional nuance that's there. We have more diversity in the workplace, which is wonderful. But when you have people that have sort of very different like backgrounds or perspectives, there's naturally more conflict, right? We also live in a more polarized world. We have more information around these macro events that sort of differentially impact people that are leading into the workplace, and so all of this has really raised the temperature. Um, Secondly, emotionally charged refers to the fact that leaders are really charged with managing emotions in the workplace. So it really has those dual meanings, sort of the nature of the workplace, as well as um, sort of defining an element that's so critical to leaders' roles. So that's emotionally charged.
And what are the tools that you give people in the book that can help them navigate this whole complex world that they're dealing with, which is not only their own emotions of fear and anger and
Right.
uncertainty and I mean, look, the list goes on and on and on. But are there some very poignant things that you could point out that would be extremely valuable for a listener today? I mean, you even said yourself, and I was going to ask you, you know, you went through this kind of journey, but you also ended up being certified through the Hudson Institute. And I know the way they train coaches, it's in particularly, you must have had some major insights as a result of having gone through the Hudson Institute's course. What year was that for you? Had you graduated?
It's at Hudson in 2016.
2016, okay. So, much has changed for you since then, I would presume,
Mhm.
yeah? Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Um, so to kinda go back to that first question, right, around tools. I think, one of the things that's really important to understand about regulating emotions, whether it is your emotion or the emotions of others, is different tools, right? There's a lot of different tools, and our book is chock full of them. They have different use cases, right? So in our book, we talk about what are the strategies that are most effective for before you go into an emotionally charged event. What do you do when you're in the event and you get triggered all of a sudden, right? Because this happens. And then also, what do you do after an event? Like when you are completely drained, how do you recover effectively? And then there's a whole nother section with um, tools that really relate to some of the situations that leaders find themselves in frequently these days. Like having to deliver bad news, like another organizational change for a changed fatigue team, or a layoff, or supporting a team member. So anyhow, there are a ton of tools, but I think one of the most important things to know is like these different tools have different optimal times to be used. But if we were to take one example, would you like to do that? Sort of like just take one use case and break it down a bit, or where would you like to go?
Yeah, I mean, as you're speaking, it's funny. I did a recent interview with Dr. Sikamar Rao, who has the Rao Institute, and again, huge coach, almost like a Marshall Goldsmith.
Hmm.
And he told the story, which you probably were told, good things, bad things, who knows,
Hmm.
right? And I think it comes down to particularly kind of perspective. In other words, to keep yourself out of being emotionally charged, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or right, it's the mindset that I bring to that at the time I come into that, knowing who's going to be in the room, how I can manage my emotions, that kind of thing. So if you want to break it down, I would like to have that because I think that would help the listeners.
Sure, 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 sure. So yeah, you have hit on something that's really important and can especially be effective as you're preparing for an emotionally charged event. Like if you look at your calendar as a leader, you might inevitably see like some meeting you're kind of dreading later in the week, right? And so what do you do in advance of that meeting? And getting yourself in the right mindset is a piece of it, right? So oftentimes when we're facing something that we're kind of dreading, we may distract ourselves, knock off like tasks, not really spend the time thinking about it, what is the best mindset going into this meeting, the one that's going to be most effective. And what we know from years and years and years of research is there actually are a couple things you can do to get your sort of mindset in a way that will help you optimally in that meeting. And I very much subscribe to that philosophy that you were talking to about news, good news, who knows, right? Because none of us have a crystal ball. But specifically, what the science is showing is um, is visualizing success, right? Many of us go to worst case scenario, or I'm gonna go in, the whole thing's gonna blow, right? Like we go to worst case scenario. That's like sort of the survival mechanism in our brain, like being like on high alert. But actually visualizing success and thinking about the potential positive outcomes is a far more effective strategy before a meeting. A second thing that can be most effective, again, instead of going to worst case and playing that out, pondering what are potential solutions? Like, what are ways I could go about this and really trying to um, tune into sort of creative ways of thinking about it. Um, and then last but not least, and it may be one that is least natural for people as they're moving into a situation where, perhaps they're meeting with somebody who, they've had conflict with or whom they just really don't like, whatever the case may be, is thinking about gratitudes. Like, what am I grateful for? Like, what is this what's the opportunity here? Right? What's actually good about this situation or this person? Those 3 things can help you move into a mindset that is far more effective for handling the event that you're anticipating. Um, and so there's a few more strategies too that will help people before emotionally draining events. Um, but you can see how that mindset piece, like, that's really, really great before an event. Um, During the event itself, if all of a sudden you find yourself angry or overwhelmed, different strategies are going to be most effective. And so we really break this down in the book. Like, there's a whole chapter about what to do before. There's a chapter of like what to do when you're in the midst of like getting triggered. So you get the drill, like different things at different times.
I do believe the gratitude one is a big one. I also know that people are big on gratitude journals, but I think, and I'm going to make a statement here, and I hope people understand. Um, you don't find gratitude; gratitude finds you, and you become gratitude. Um, Hopefully, that's not too deep. But the reality is, it's always great to do the journals and to have the gratitude, but you have to learn how to let go. And that brings me to this whole thing that we haven't discussed, which is um, time, the issue of time. We've
Mhm.
said time several times during this interview, but I think leaders today who get emotionally charged are frequently charged by a time constraint, some constraint that's been put on them to deadline on a project. They have to renegotiate the timeline because they can't get it done. The team isn't performing it as expected. What
Mhm.
would you do to help people deal with this linear thing that we've created as a society, which really, I know it is really big inside of corporations and it has to be. Yet, on the other hand, when you start to look at your, I don't want to say it, your finitude in life, where you might ultimately end up, the timeline doesn't make as much importance as the experiences.
Mhm.
What you experienced in the journey along the way, what you learned along the way.
Mhm.
So, what might you help listeners put time in perspective, or at least be able to renegotiate those timelines with upper management or people so that they're feeling more comfortable? Because if there's one thing that causes stress, that's probably it.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. um, Time feeling as though you don't have the time, um, which can be a very legitimate feeling, is a stressor, right? And leaders are constantly being asked to do things more quickly, to do it more quickly with less, to do more, and it absolutely contributes to, um that feeling of overwhelm and stress that people are carrying around. There was actually, um, an article, it may have came out today even, in HBR, and it's all about, being hurry sick, right? Being that in that constantly hurried state.
That's a good title. I'll have to look that one up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think there is a lot of hurry sickness, not just in leaders.
Mhm.
But the reality is, if a leader is responsible for a group of people, yeah,
Mhm.
more time constraints.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um And there's a few different ways, I think, to approach this, and in the work that I do with leaders, right, like, it is all customized because what makes, um one challenge, difficult for one person, there may be other things kinda, like, standing in the way of solving for an issue for another person. And so we would need to, like, dig under, um, what makes it really challenging for them, because sometimes there's, like, blocking and tackling elements that can be helpful, like ruthless prioritization and managing up and things where, They're
How do you help Dina? Sorry for this, but I think one of the things is the amount of tasks a leader takes on. How do you allow them to gracefully say no?
Mhm.
Because the reality is when the plate is already full and they're spinning all these plates to try and keep them in the air and they drop one or two or whatever, that's not good for their emotion. On top of that, to have too many of those plates spinning at the same time is very challenging. So they have to know when to say no gracefully.
Mhm.
What would you basically advise them on saying no?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually wrote an article about just that. It's called "How and When to Say No to Your Boss." Um, and, um Eh, First off, oftentimes, your boss has no idea how much is on your plate. They're also not thinking about the potential trade-offs, right? So you can spin all these plates and do most of them at call it like a B level average, or you can knock it out on the park on a few more. And I strongly believe if you don't have the agency to be picking and choosing exactly what you and your team are working on, then you need to sort of develop the skills and the practice of strongly managing up and laying out for your leader like the short-term and long-term consequences of that amount of expectation, right? Lots of times these expectations are getting cascaded down from the CEO into the C-suite, down into the SVPs and, functional leaders, and down they go. And they're not right-sized. They're not necessarily realistic. And when you start to kinda lay out the trade-offs up, you typically can get a lot more support for either delegating, to maybe another team that has additional resources, deleting certain tasks, delaying. Not everything needs to happen right now. Um, right? Or
I
getting additional resources.
And it's so important what you're saying. And I think, I don't want to gloss over it, but we have a lot else to cover as well. But
Yeah.
I think as long as a leader can put time in perspective here and make the time available, I think it was at Franklin Covey. Stephen Covey used to say, put this note these on the door, I'm thinking.
Mhm,
Right? So and you can close your door. So the question is how much time are people actually getting time to think?
mhm,
Meaning strategically, a little more methodically. It's like they should be asking why for many
mhm.
of these things. Why is it that we're doing it?
Yeah,
Because sometimes I think someone comes up with another good idea, says that we're going to go charge after it. It maybe comes from top management. It sends it way through the organization. In the end, there's zero support because they haven't really taken the time to see where it is.
right.
So you mentioned these emotional triggers in the book, and we've talked about some of them, people, circumstances, and events. How can listeners identify the triggers and what steps can they take to respond rather than react? Because I think, look, that's always like, let's take a deep breath. Before I say anything, so I don't put my foot in my mouth. And I think that's a great one. Yet on the other hand, I'm sure you have other ways to help deal with the triggers.
Yes, absolutely. Um, so let's start with identifying the triggers. This should always be a work in progress, right? Um, the the issue, I would say, in part, and one of the main drivers for this book is that especially here in the Western world, we really kind of over rely on our heads. And we've got three centers of intelligence, right? We have our head, which is great for thinking and logic. Um, we have our body, which gives us so much feedback if we tune into it. And then we have our emotions, which again provides so much feedback and data as long as we acknowledge them. And so I
Where do you set Dina on spiritual intelligence? I've actually had people written full books on the whole spiritual intelligence side of things, which it would really be more around intuition. But I'm going to just say Look, some of the greatest leaders that have been cited from Steve Jobs to Bill Gates have said some of the most important things that they took into meetings was truly their intuition,
Mhm.
right?
Absolutely. And
And a very
intuition is
strong
something
sense
you
of
can
it.
cultivate.
Right, and to me, that's as close as I can get to bringing some level of spirituality into it as a spiritual intelligence, because they call it SI, EI, it's got, we've got all these letters associated with it.
Right.
Um, do you, address that side of the emotional s
No, no, and
No, okay.
I know that's been a focus for you in your work and
Somewhat. Yeah, I'm just saying I bring it up because it has been something where people actually have scores for it and tests for it, and it's out in the world and it's out there and I know it's there. So going back to these triggers,
yeah.
what can our listeners uh I'm going to just say what can they do?
Okay. Well, first they do need to identify their triggers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And we talk about that in the book, but it is about connecting sensations in their body with their emotions. So you can think about really backwards engineering and situations where you've like lost your cool or gotten really sad or gotten overwhelmed or had some other intense emotion. What I encourage you to go back is to go back and think about, like, what was it? What were the factors that contributed to that feeling? And where did I feel it in my body? Right? Because over time, you will build up this incredible repository of self-awareness of of the sensations in your body and how they connect to emotions. And why this is important is because your body is your first warning sign, right? And when it comes to really strong emotions, we typically want to, moderate them. Um,
Your gut feeling. That's one of the big areas where people get emotionally charged,
yeah.
is they have an upset stomach or they have something going on, but that's why they call it a gut reaction.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, for example, for me, I know, when I feel like my core starting to tighten up and my lungs clench, like, I do know it's time for me to breathe because no matter, that is the best course of action for me because I'm mad.
Mhm.
I'm gonna say something I might regret, right? There's the potential for that. And so, because I've spent a little bit of time, it doesn't take that much time to do this, to sort of just think about like, okay, what was that? What triggered me? And where did I feel it? I have all of this I've got like an incredible advanced warning system now, um, which can be incredibly useful. But so let's go to the second part of your question, like, let's just say you have been triggered, like, what do you do? Because there
Mm.
are events at work, no matter how much time we spend meditating or, strategizing around how we're gonna have a good day and make the day great for everyone around us too.
Right.
There are events, right, that come out of nowhere, they're unpredictable, they feel as though they endanger you in some way, um, and you're triggered. Boom, there you go, right? And like you mentioned, breathing is actually, it is a great strategy, right? Because it helps you through your vagus nerve, through exhaling through longer exhales and deeper breaths, you downregulate your parasympathetic nervous system. So um, so yeah, it is a great one, but we have a whole acronym that we developed that is sort of a suite of things for down regulating, and it's the BRAVE framework. So B is for breathing, um, R is for recognizing, and that goes to like, where am I feeling it in my body, right? This is a deeply grounding thing to do, right? You are turning your attention elsewhere. You might call it strategic distraction. Um, but you are turning your attention inside, which is grounding. And for people who are still trying to like get that mind body connection, even distracting yourself, just rubbing your fingers together and feeling like, oh, I can feel that. Like this will ground you in your body and again, reduce that emotional response. A is for acceptance. So
Mhm.
oftentimes when we feel something, we invalidate it. Or we're like, go away. Like, I can't deal with you right now. As opposed to just accepting that your emotion is real and valid in the moment. Um, and V is for verbalize, which is choosing a label for the emotion. I feel angry, and that's okay. These things really bring your prefrontal cortex more online,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so your brain, and it's super simplistic, and but it works like a seesaw. Like the more you're engaging your sort of frontal lobes, the less your emotion system has a chance to override it. So these are 4 different
You
tools.
forgot E.
Well, E is engage.
Okay.
So E is engage. So like once you have
So you've identified it, you breathe, you identify, and then
you
you
identify
figure out the
it,
emotion,
choose a
accept it, and
uh,
then engage.
yeah, and you don't need to do all 4 steps. All 4 steps is great and literally maybe will take you 30 seconds. However, just employing like one of these strategies is better than none.
That little acronym is great, and I'm glad you had an opportunity to articulate that because I think for the listeners, look, sometimes they're looking for quick fixes, little things that they could do. And if the book brings them, like you said, it's filled with tools, but the reality is it gives them an opportunity to choose what they want to do, learn what they can from the book, take it away, and apply it to their daily lives. And I think that's one of the keys to having a successful book is if I could take, and this is my question for you. So if listeners here today were to remember just one lesson from the book, what would you want that lesson to be? Um, and can you articulate it or tell us what you'd like them to take away?
Mhm, mhm. Um, One of the reasons why, I think emotions haven't gotten sort of like their respect and their due in workplaces is because there are still a lot of myths and misconceptions about their role and value at work. And so if I were to think of just one thing, that I would want listeners to take away, it's that emotions are information. They are data. Um, and there is unbelievable utility for both your effectiveness as a leader and a person and your well-being when you tune into this information source, um, and use it. And so our book contains all of these different ways for tuning in, um, and then using emotions in ways that are effective and healthy. And so, it's just emotions are information, like, and I think all good leaders would not ignore data. So,
Well, I think
important source.
it's kind of a feedback loop, right? It's like I have this data and that's how we grow. And that brings me to kind of my last question here. You know, you've matured and grown. You've gone through all these coaching courses. You've helped hundreds, if not thousands of people kind of navigate this environment, this emotionally charged environment. And looking back, what advice uh, about emotions and growth would you give your younger self?
Yeah, gosh. I wish I'd paid attention sooner rather than
Yeah,
later.
me too. I feel the same way.
I think I missed out on some really useful information that could have helped me both lead myself and lead others more effectively earlier on. I don't even know what that information is because I didn't pay attention to it.
Well, you weren't aware of it at the time. Now you're very much more aware of it, which makes it much more valuable. And that's what you're trying to let people know is awareness is where it starts.
Yeah.
And that's the first important thing is to realize that something's charging me. I need to understand what it is, and I need to learn how to deal with it versus brush it under the carpet. And when it comes back up again, I don't know how to deal with it again and again and again and again. So the psychology that's in your book is extremely important about how to deal with emotions. And I want to guide my listeners to, your website now that they have an overview of the book. It's just Dana, and it's Dana D.
Enough.
Smith. Dina, I'm sorry, DinaDSmith.com. It's DinaDSmith.com. That's where you're going to find the information about the book, her executive coaching program, team development, articles, case libraries, the new book itself. There's a whole page dedicated to the book. And if you go there now, you can order this book on Amazon. It's going to release on February 18th. And so you can go for a pre-order copy. So definitely click the button to either Amazon or Oxford. I have a feeling most people will click the Amazon button. And if you want to speak or get in touch with Dina herself because you have an engagement or you have something you'd like to speak with her about or her services, there's a contact there. You can reach out to her and get in touch with her. Dina, pleasure having you on Inside Personal Growth to share about your new book. I know it's going to be a big success in all those people that read it. It will help them a lot. You've spent years working, studying, and understanding what it's like to be emotionally charged. And you and your co-author, it's Alicia, and pronounce her last name. I want to make sure she gets credit. Grandy. That both of you guys, I wish you much success with the book and much success in your consulting practice and helping people, more importantly.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It was great to talk to you.
All right. You take care.
You too.
Thank you for listening to this podcast on Inside Personal Growth. We appreciate your support. And for more information about new podcasts, please go to InsidePersonalGrowth.com or any of your favorite channels to listen to our podcast. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.